Live stream is go.
All right. What's up, everyone, and welcome to Simulation. We have a great episode for you today. We are going to be talking about better cryptocurrencies, and to do so, we have Gene Hoffman.
Hi.
Thanks for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Greatly appreciate it. And you are an investor and advisor at Chia.
That's correct.
And you also work as a board member and interim CTO at AE Token.
That's correct.
And then previously at Vindicia, which you founded and sold.
That's correct.
And so we have a lot to unpack about better cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, let's figure this out because we have a lot of progress to go in figuring out how to best exchange units for things and services and yeah.
Well, you know, look, there's an old joke. I run into people who say they've been in cryptocurrency for a long time, and I ask them, how long? And they say something like 7 or 10 years. And I'm like, I've been in it 20. Because, you know, this is a set of problems that people have been trying to solve since the late 90s. You know, the original cypherpunks movement. It's very much a, needed core piece, but there were all these kind of critical security and computer science problems that had to have novel solutions, frankly. And, the neat thing about Bitcoin is it's almost perfect. But the almost is actually one of its critical flaws.
Okay, so I want to ask, it's like, you and Eddie were making a joke before the show that cryptocurrency's been around longer than currency has.
I don't know if I'd say it's longer than currency has, but it's certainly much, much longer than like what people think of as the cryptocurrency
20
business.
years, I mean, that's really long. It doesn't, we don't actually think that it's been around that long.
Yeah, there were things called like David Chaum's Chaumian Digital Cash, DigiCash.
DigiCash.
Yeah, but it had a single point of failure. And if you've watched what's happened in modern times, when the technology that nobody wants around has a single point of failure, well, things like Napster happen, and then one day Napster gets shut down. And then things like BitTorrent rise, and they're truly decentralized. And a very similar pattern in getting from what the late 90s cypherpunks wanted to Bitcoin.
And give us a quick education on the single point of failure of Napster, and then also the rise of BitTorrent.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Napster went out and said, okay, we're going to do centralized servers, and we're going to make it so when you download our software, we'll automatically find all your MP3 files and publish them. But that meant that there was a central server that somebody could go shut down. And the next step was for Bram Cohen to go out and build BitTorrent, which was a truly peer-to-peer protocol. It required no real single point of failure. So, the game of whack-a-mole that would have to be done by governments to try to stop it would be extremely hard.
Interesting. So rather than the centralization of all of the power into one centralized Napster server, this peer-to-peer network of BitTorrent was created, making you a node, me a node, whoever's using it a node, and then it decentralized and distributed the MP3 files and
movies and everything else to the point where BitTorrent was something like 45% of all internet traffic before the rise of OTT television, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's over the top, which means like Netflix and Hulu, YouTube, et cetera.
Yeah, back when Netflix was just barely making the transition away from DVDs, BitTorrent was kind of nightly downloads, full stop.
Yeah, I remember using that, like, whatever it was, 10, 15 years ago, something like that now. But, okay, so that's a really good example of centralization and decentralization.
Well, and in fact, so, to give you kind of the reason that Bitcoin really solved a huge problem, when I sold my first company, which built ad blockers, to PGP about a year later was sold to McAfee, and I was deciding what to do next. And it was either start a downloadable music company or start a cryptocurrency bank. And I talked to my now wife, and I said, well, honey, this has to happen. It's critically important for the future of the internet. But we'll probably have to live on some strange Caribbean island surrounded by armed guards because, well, you're the central point of failure for the entire crypto bank. Yeah. And she said, why don't you go pick on the record labels?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, we do not want any sort of family at risk with
exactly.
the centralization. But one can also say, interestingly enough, even if whatever becomes decentralized, that even then there is a group of people like this Bitcoin core or Ethereum Foundation that can then still be picked on.
A bit. I mean, look, there's an argument that a lot of folks make that the one point of failure is Github, right? I mean, if you think about it, that's where the source is. Often there's a couple developers, but you fundamentally want to get these projects to a place I use Linux a little bit because in some ways Linus still has a little too much control of Linux, right? But right now, if Linus was hit by a bus, hopefully he looks both ways before stepping out, there's enough core developers of Linux, of all the different pieces, that it would go forward no matter what. And that's true of Bitcoin as well. I mean, you're going to have a very, very hard time rounding up all of the sources of Bitcoin releases, the actual developers, and because the source is out there, right? It's on BitTorrent. It's available on servers globally. You can't really stuff that genie back in the bottle.
And then what is then this point of failure of Bitcoin, although it's almost perfect? What's the point of failure? How's Chia better? We have a lot to explore. You have, on the deck here, it says, green money for a digital world. And
Exactly.
there's like a leaf in the logo. So yeah, tell us about
Well, so there was one assumption made in solving the Byzantine general problem, proof of work. And the idea around proof of work, it was originally one CPU, one vote. So, everybody had a laptop, you'd be able to mine, and, our generalized computers, there's a bunch of them. It was kind of taking the old SETI and folding it home and those things forward into the future. But it turns out that that's not the case. It is completely solvable to make custom hardware. So you've got people putting billions of dollars into custom chip fabrications to make proof of work, miners, right, that both get faster and faster than any generalized computer can, and then use tremendous amounts of power. I mean, we're literally talking about a G20 country's monthly use of power.
Yeah, that is crazy. And specialized chips.
Well, and that specialized chips, it has this kind of nasty circular problem of specialized chips mean investment, mean you can afford to go into partnership with power companies, which centralizes mining more and more and more. And the whole point behind Bitcoin was that everybody should be mining.
Yeah.
Right. And right now, you go to China and you grab two people and you might have 51% of all Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. And that's a big problem.
It's an extremely big problem because, as Bitcoin or Chia in the future start to become a reserve currency of the world,
Correct.
all of a sudden nation states are playing against nation states. And in that environment, having 51% control might be really interesting to, stop an arms payment or, bankrupt another country. There's some really, dangerous kinds of things that can happen when you have this kind of level of core infrastructure reliant on only a few people.
Yep. And as why is my payment not being processed? Why is all of a sudden there's more and more security around these people that have a majority of the power contracts, the chip contracts, that are doing a lot of the processing of the mining. So so now that is a central flaw of what's been built so far.
That's right.
Okay.
And it runs through all cryptocurrencies right now. There are people talking about proof of stake as another solution. I think a lot of people who are talking about proof of stake kind of either don't have enough economics background to understand how dangerous that is. I mean, George Soros famously broke the British pound because the Brits said we were going to defend it, right? And that's what stakes basically are underneath. Or
stake in this case meaning that they support it, people support it.
The idea would be that you would put up your currency and use that currency as the way that you're kind of validated as someone who could mine. There are all sorts of problems with that. There are all sorts of kind of financial machinations you can do to make that break pretty badly. Because proof of work as an idea is excellent, but what proof of work is proving to waste isn't really good, actually. And that's where Chia comes in.
Yeah, let's talk about it now.
So Chia, Bram Cohen, Ryan Singer looked at this.
Right here, found in fall of 2017.
That's right, looked at the problem and said, look, the Bitcoin guys are right from a security perspective. So, if anything, I would say we're kind of almost Bitcoin maximalists in the sense of, Bitcoin is right and a lot of these other things trying to be all things to all people are somewhat scary. But, like the Ethereum community love the ethos, right? You got a bunch of people trying to build stuff, that's great. But you gotta have those core deep security roots right to be able to have kind of a global platform for money and compute, right? Hard enough to just do money. But we looked at it and Bram came up with an idea called proof of space and time. And it's really proof of unused space and elapsed time. A couple different reasons why you need both, but let's talk about proof of space first, because it's kind of the core thing that's different. It turns out, to solve the Byzantine generals problem, you have to provably waste something. And so the idea was, back in the day, compute or GPU would be what you'd provably waste. Well,
You'd be wasting energy in the computations.
Right. The idea was, you had some spare, so you'd use it. Well, it turns out there's a commodity that a lot of people have a lot spare of, and that's empty hard drive space.
Interesting.
And so it's very interesting in the sense that,
A couple terabytes of empty hard drive space.
Look, we've had a slight dip in the market in that now your laptop usually only has about 30% free because of the price of SSD.
Yeah,
but even that's about to change again.
Yeah.
So everybody used to buy, double the storage they needed, and so half of it sat there idle. And especially in what I'd call like middle enterprises, where they go, we're going to do this storage install this month. We're going to install for the next 3 or 4 years. So we're putting in terabytes and terabytes, and many of them are going to sit idle. Well, now all of a sudden you can download Chia. You'd add in the proofs of space, and what you do is you spend a few hours computing a massively parallel kind of problem that writes out these lottery tickets, is the best way to think about them, cryptographic lottery tickets. And so you fill 300 gigs, a terabyte, 10 terabytes, whatever you kind of have spare. And you can do it in smaller blobs so that as you're using your space up, I need a new 300. I'll delete one of my, and we call it farming, so it's one of your plots.
Okay.
Right? And the idea here is that every 5 minutes, unlike Bitcoin, we'll do it a little faster, there'll be a challenge from the last block. And you'll look on your drive and go, do I have the best answer to that challenge? Do I have the bingo card? Right? And if you do, you'll win that block's rewards.
Yep.
But the thing is that's pretty quick. You look up your hard drive, within the first minute of that block, everybody's going to figure out who's got the best proof of space. Right?
And then it's the same sort of idea of I shout out the answer and everybody else agrees that is the right one. It's easier to say that is the correct answer than to come up with the right
That's
answer.
right.
So, but now if you have a couple petabytes of space, it's easier for you to store different lottery tickets, right? So
yeah, your lottery ticket winning effectiveness rate, right, is if you got a petabyte and somebody else has a terabyte, you're going to win 10 times more often than they are, directly linearly. Right.
And so then does that also kind of have the similar problem of these massive hard drive farms? And
no, not really. And again, this
Okay.
comes back to two things. Spinning disk is pretty cheap electrically, right? And most of the disk that's spinning is spinning regardless of whether Chia exists or not. Your render farm at a major animation studio is going to be used heavily during production, but in between, petabytes just laying there doing nothing. Right? So we think that there's a stronger overhead of kind of unused space. But most importantly, even if we're wrong, every day, Hitachi and Western Digital and Seagate wake up in the morning trying to figure out how to most cheaply store random information, right? And so there's no magic bullet that changes this from hard drives. And if it does, well, great. Now our iPhones will come with a terabyte instead of a gigabyte. Right, so when we're putting that kind of social pressure and financial pressure on a commodity, we really like doing that with storage because storage is useful otherwise. An Antminer, version X isn't useful to do anything but mine Bitcoin.
Okay, so this is the proof of space.
That's right.
Okay, that now I have extra hard drive space. I'm storing lottery tickets that are a couple megabytes per lottery ticket.
The ticket itself for
Kilobytes,
a text message, right? It's not a big
Super
piece.
small.
It's like a hash.
It's a
right?
hash. It's
Exactly.
a very small amount of space.
But you're putting a bunch of them on your plot.
Millions, billions, etc. of lottery tickets. And then every 5 minutes, there's a call for who has the lottery ticket for the next block.
That's right.
And so then there's actually no computation.
The computation comes in front, and that's also where proof of time comes in.
Okay.
So because these proofs will be relatively quickly found, you don't have a real easy ability to kind of have that normal metronomic, block rate that Bitcoin has, right?
This isn't a random number generation for the lottery tickets, right?
No, the idea here is what's called a verifiable delay function. So one of the things that crypto academics have been trying to solve for a long time is I'd like to disclose this press release in 24 hours. And I want to post it, and I want a piece of crypto that would allow everybody else, once those 24 hours have elapsed, to open it, right? So delaying things has been something that has kind of been core academic research. And what's starting to happen with things like ZK snarks and others is that you can start doing things that are very non-parallelizable. You can only use one core on the CPU, maybe 1.5. And so you can do things like exponentiate, or you can take a hash of a hash of a hash, right? But the problem is that in the past, if you wanted to prove that you'd done 5 minutes worth of work, it would take everybody 5 minutes worth of time to prove it. So now we're coming up with ways that you can take like a 20-minute proof of time. It takes you like a second to prove it. So everybody out there on the blockchain can quickly see that yes, this time server really did the approximately 5 minutes of work. And the way this all works is proof of space and time multiply together. So a really good proof of space takes a little less time to complete. And that's how it wins. So it might be like a perfect proof of space, might get done in 4 minutes instead of 5.
And so you're constantly bringing down the amount of time?
We're doing a work level adjustment just like Bitcoin, right? So you're saying, hey, we want these things to end every 5 minutes. As time servers get faster, that will be harder, there'll be more iterations that are required.
Okay. And I know we'll also visit the website, which I think is going to give us really good insight as well. So less mining, centralization, no mining waste of electricity.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the electricity thing is key, right?
It's been a big issue.
Look, when I took some time off after selling Vindicia a couple years ago, I knew cryptocurrency was what I needed to be doing. I'd been in this business in a sense for 20 plus years. It was a disconcerting thought to think about like making Bitcoin be the global reserve currency and, increasing annual global energy use by a third, right? This is just not a fun concept when you start scaling it up.
If it was at least sustainable, like solar or something, it would be different wind. But
well, it still might, but then the thing is you're still wasting a bunch of capex. I mean, like I would rather see the price of power fall, right? Because
or a more sustainable way to do
right.
Yeah,
but I mean, like let's take that same sustainability asset and move it to driving and desalinating and actual useful things. Because there's certainly this argument that maybe Bitcoin's energy use is overhyped because Visa runs servers and all of this. But in reality, you're not specifically choosing to waste electricity in the other ways that this works.
Yeah,
right?
Correct.
Here we're saying it is true that you have to choose something to waste to have the security that's necessary to do a blockchain right? And so we'd much rather choose storage, and we'd much rather have storage be something that everybody can use. When your storage becomes out of date, now you put your movies on it. Like that's the worst case scenario for Chia becoming massive.
Or your consciousness.
Exactly. May the upload happen sooner.
Yeah. Right now, we recently had David Eagleman on the show, and he was teaching us that right now, as they map every single one of the trillions of connections that's out in the brain, that it actually takes a zettabyte and that's like, what?
Well, and it's also a little scary because there was and I forget the name of the law, but a Moore's law equivalent for how much your drive space, halved in price every 18 to 24 months.
Yeah. That's
slowing down right now.
It is, it's slowing down.
Yeah, in both hard drive and SSD. Now, it might be somewhat the transition because, the drive manufacturers have a hard time of, I can't have my revenue lost selling spinning, but I really want to go to solid state.
Yeah.
Still, it's kind of a scary point that we're heading toward potentially some physical limits of how much storage can get cheaper.
And then we're also storing in DNA now, which is very interesting and so much smaller, so much more energy efficient.
Well, look. If we got to the point where there were entrepreneurs building DNA hard drives because of Chia, we've won.
We've won,
right? Nothing bad is happening there because those are going to be useful for that zettabyte of you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yep. Okay, so and then we got, ICOs are broken.
This is the other major innovation. I ran a public company, eMusic, did it the hard way by buying a shell and moving it to NASDAQ, and so have had a kind of more insider view of how the SEC and the NASDAQ really work. And I was watching these American ICOs go on, and it's just like, I'm sorry, that's illegal, right? You're selling equity to unregistered investors. Like, no, you can't do that, right? But there's no real reason to fear the SEC. A lot of people, I think of the SEC as the enforcement division because that's what gets the news. But the SEC's job is capital formation. Its whole actual reason for being is to make it easier and to make sure that investors are both protected, but that there are real investment opportunities and those things scale. And after the 2008 crisis, there were some new changes to SEC laws, and I think the crisis kind of overshadowed the changes, and it took them kind of a couple years to realize they were there. And one is called Regulation A+. What Regulation A+ is part of the crowdfunding programs they've come up with. It'll allow companies to raise up to $50 million a year if they're audited, and up to $25 million a year if they're not audited but just reviewed, right? And we looked at this and went, we should do an actual equity offering, right? When you're working with a brand new enterprise that is absolutely being backed by, Bram Cohen, myself, others, Ryan's work, you're making an investment, right? You're hoping for an outcome that returns you money. Well, let's make it clear that it's an investment, and then let's distribute those coins to shareholders, because then you have all the pieces you need. Clearly one piece is equity, clearly one piece is a commodity.
You would actually have a cap table.
Correct. And you'll be able to invest, and we'll be a public company.
And
so not only...
This sounds like a really good way to transition.
It's a much better way, right? Because you're saying, look, we're making SEC reviewed comments about factual statements. Yes, proofs of space will do this. Yes, proofs of time will do that. This is our delivery timeline. This is how much cash we have.
You're putting skin in the game.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're saying, look, there's no reason not to look over our shoulder, and let's do it right.
Yeah, let's do it right. Yeah,
right.
I like that. I think that increases the transparency of everything that's going on. It makes it easier for other people to understand what's going on, for other people to get involved in what's going on.
That's right, and it offers all the classic investor protections, right? Yeah. We're going to go to quarterly reporting. You don't necessarily have to for other ICOs. But again, I think we want to, in some ways, be hyper compliant. I mean, one of the things that's holding Bitcoin back is its original, I think, misbranding as drugs and money laundering, right? And by being compliant, by being green, by being well known, we want people to start thinking about the real use cases, right? It is things like, if you're Venezuelan, cryptocurrency is the only way you've saved your wealth, right? Mm-hmm. It's impossible to do banking transactions in East Africa, right? Solving those problems first is important, but look, been raising some money, right? And I have these moments where I'm talking to international investors, and we're literally watching the bank system steal like $20 here and $15 there, or say it's going to take 15 days to send $50,000. I mean, the running joke is, I'm like, we're investing in these things to stop this.
Yes. Yeah, 15 days to invest 50K.
It's crazy.
That should be, a couple minutes.
Yeah, like well-known, say, Canadian bank, well-known U.S. bank, 15 days and $75 in fees.
Yeah. That's nonsense.
That's right.
And let's get rid of middlemen that are doing that.
Doing badly.
Yeah.
So be a company, right?
Mm-hmm. Fundraise a company instead of a network.
Exactly. Put our skin in the game of saying, these are the risks. Maybe you don't want to invest, right? But these are the rewards. We believe them. They're forward-looking statements. So you can't guarantee them. But this is how you interact with companies. And the SEC recently has been saying the same sorts of things, where they're saying, look, some of these coins may very well transition from being securities to being utility tokens. Like, they look at Bitcoin and go, that is a coin, it's a piece of property, it's not a security, right? Well, we're saying, let's disambiguate it clearly, right? If you're a shareholder, right? We're making promises to you about outcomes, right? But if you're a coin holder, you don't have the same problem. Now, there'll obviously be a lot of overlap between shareholders and coin holders initially. Yeah. But in some ways, Chia Network's really long-term view is, how do we get ourselves out of even being necessary for Chia? You don't want to have a single point of failure, even a perceived single point of failure, right? But when you build these things initially, some centralization helps to really get going and make those initial decisions, and then move things forward in a community way.
Yep. And then, just as this last slide on timeline, you guys are finishing up a regular IPO?
Yeah, we're actually going to file with the SEC here shortly. Cool. And the question is always what time it takes the SEC. I will say that usually 60 days is a pretty accurate view of kind of the questions that the SEC will have about these sorts of filings. On the one hand, we're a little novel. On the other hand, we've been involved with making sure they understand what we want to do.
And I have your domain here open, and I want to just also showcase this because it's really interesting. Chia.net, the link's in the bio. Green money for a digital world, building a blockchain based on proofs of space and time to make a cryptocurrency as less wasteful, more decentralized, more secure. Kind of talked about those things now. Maybe I want to know if is your proof of space and time, is that also listed under the talks and papers that you've done?
There are talks. Bram has kind of good overviews and good technical deeps. We also have quite a few. We don't really have
given a lot of talks.
That's right.
Yeah.
We don't have a white paper. We have peer-reviewed, published academic papers, quite intentionally. We're taking some time to get this right, to make sure it's secure, to build a better Bitcoin. And it's not just proof of space and time. That's the big thing. But like, there's a lot of things where, it's a 10-year-old product and it shows some cruft. So we just released a BLS signature library.
And that stands for what again?
Oh gosh, one of our advisors' names, I can't remember, I apologize. But the idea is that the way digital signatures work in Bitcoin today, multi-sig and wallets can be kind of hard to do.
Yeah.
BLS, you can sign something and I can sign something, not at the same time, not in the same place.
Yeah.
You can add those two together and those two signatures add,
Yeah.
and that shows that it's still signed. So it's things like that to shrink the size of the blockchain, for example, and to make multi-sig wallets much, much easier to do. So there's some really neat new crypto that's kind of happened in the last 5 years that we're going to adopt into that blockchain.
Okay, so I like that. I think there's a good amount of people that are tackling the multi-sig situation, also the decreasing the amount of space that everything actually ends up taking. This is I'm happy to learn about this and to hear about this. And we initially met at Silicon Valley Blockchain Society, and it was great to hear you guys present there as well. And so Bram Cohen is leading this.
That's right.
That's very interesting.
It's a very R&D focused company, as you can imagine.
Super R&D focused.
And one of the things I'd say is that it's our goal to be one of the most R&D friendly blockchains, period. There's a lot of things that a lot of Bitcoin core developers and others would really like to add or do to Bitcoin. And this minor investment in ASICs and power has led them to be very conservative and worried about feature changes and all of this. And by not having any kind of central focused entity saying this is how you should do it, we think we can really advance those things we all know we'd like to do. So time locks and escrow and inheritance. I mean, there's all these features that would be really nice.
Yes.
And we think we can do them better, more efficiently, and quicker on Chia.
And then what is the main sort of programming language of the Chia Network?
It's C underneath, and then it's Python generally around, right? So because of performance, good old-fashioned C, C++, the place to be. But at the more application level, Python.
Okay, and that's where you can build out things like escrow or inheritance.
Well, and some of this is actually having some of the core guys have more tools and easier to use stuff. Like we're going to change how script works because it can be pretty ugly right now in Bitcoin, and we're going to take some things away that will still allow you to do a lot of the features you want, but make them much more secure. It's those kinds of things that we're trying to do to bring the kind of Bitcoin code base into the future.
Awesome. Okay, so that's pretty solid on Chia. I got so much more to learn. I'm so ignorant about blockchains and cryptocurrencies. I want to keep learning as much as possible and keep disseminating and keep inspiring people to use them. And we now accept cryptocurrency. The link's in the bio, although it's a Coinbase account.
That's great. Hey, got to start somewhere.
Got to start somewhere, exactly. Okay, so let's also talk about AE Token, some of the work there. So I have pulled up here. AE Token safeguards and increases all your affiliate revenue and deals in one place. Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, I think every ICO comes with skepticism these days, and I have a lot of the same skepticism. And it's one of the reasons I like this project is it's solving a couple of very real problems. So you may have heard of Basic Attention Token, Brave, and the attempt to kind of go after the advertising industry to make it so that the viewers cut in and the ad fraud falls and all those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Well, there's also a primary traffic driving way called affiliate marketing, and around the globe, different industries use it differently. Like here in the U.S., Amazon still has a very significant affiliate program, but there are a lot of jurisdictions where what the affiliates drive traffic to, things like online casinos, completely legal, completely legitimate. Americans hate it, and it's a very big business. Now it's weird because it's so patchwork. You haven't had kind of these monoliths. There's no Facebook of this market, right? But you've got a lot of these kind of medium to small businesses, like 10 guys driving traffic to an e-commerce site in Germany, and they're making enough money to easily afford to run the business, but it doesn't really scale beyond that. But they run into two huge problems. Problem number one is that most of these guys get paid out in Skrill, which is kind of global PayPal. And so all of the nasty things you ever heard about PayPal, apply in force. So there's extremely expensive currency exchange rates. You can only take out so much per day. One of my friends in this world bought a Mercedes, and he had to convince the Mercedes dealer that he could only pay him about 1/21th for the next 21 days to buy it in cash. Right. So their accounts get frozen. Things go well, and that means you can't access your money. Really horribly painful, and obviously one of those things that a cryptocurrency has a lot of value for. Plus, there's also a real kind of pyramid of division. So you'll have a site, and you'll have a super affiliate, and you'll have a bunch of sub affiliates, and so you can have people who are owed like a nickel. And in the past, it's not worth paying somebody a nickel because there's absolutely no way from a fees perspective that makes sense. So like people would have their balances sit for months until they added up to something that was worth transferring. Well, the divisibility of cryptocurrency obviously is very relevant to that problem. All of a sudden now it's like, here's a tenth of a cent, you're paid up, right? And then the other issue is that these are very international businesses. So you'll have a Cayman corporation striking a deal with a Malta corporation, and if one of the sides welches in the deal, well, the reality is there's no way to sue each other because, you sue in Cayman, get an expert at a Malta. I mean, it's a very, very large contract that even makes it worth suing in the first place. So we're enabling preloaded arbitration with mediators. So that normally transaction goes through, mediator gets an extremely tiny fee just for having been there and been available. But if you actually have a problem, now there's recourse, and you've got coins out there locked, waiting for this resolution of your dispute. So all of a sudden, both sides are actually forced to play fair, and we think that's actually going to increase the size of the affiliate market.
And I like how you're describing sort of this. Well, this is definitely applicable to content creators, totally. Rather than having someone else sell the advertisements to your space and et cetera, you can bring in people that have your same values. You can then advertise on their behalf. You can then get maybe a more fair play between the two.
Well, in the past, I think folks like yourself even, right now you kind of got to use a third-party service, and that service takes its hunk, and it's not necessarily as easily managed. Making this become something that smaller, individual YouTubers or others can use directly and build their own programs. And now it's just a software problem, and all of the back office problems of paying people out and all that is now pushed away because you use this kind of currency. And instead of just using Bitcoin straight up, you're going to have lower fees. You're going to have hopefully less volatility because you actually have a functioning market where like affiliate websites are buying it to then pay it to their affiliates who are then spending it for paying the rent.
Mm-hmm. And so how long has AE Token been around?
About 7-8 months. We're currently about to do a non-US offering out of Malta. So Malta's become one of the very leading European, especially domiciles for either utility tokens or security tokens.
And why Malta?
Again, I think it's that regulatory lead.
Lead, and why are they ahead in terms of regulation?
They've been very open to understanding this. It's one of those situations where they've classically been a business-friendly haven, and they saw the kind of rise of ICOs and said, okay, let's start putting together some of the best practices. Let's adopt what I'd call a light framework, not dissimilar to what the SEC is doing here in the US. And that way you have a lot more regulatory certainty to be able to say to people, yep, there is a EU, EC country that this business is domiciled in. These are your investor protections there. There's actually a regulatory environment instead of just being the Wild West.
The perfection is the enemy of execution or getting shit done. And so if you're constantly waiting to build out the best possible framework of regulation, you'll never actually build one out. It'll take you too long. And so it's almost like they started with this toddler phase of a framework, and then that's enabling people to come in, and then they're going to upgrade it over time.
Well, it's somewhat like Delaware courts, right? Like a lot of people don't kind of know this, but like the Delaware courts have optimized themselves for businesses. So you can get rulings from the Delaware courts in like a week.
Yeah.
These are the things that don't work, but it's all about business. And so Malta, both legislatively and judicially, has kind of done this. They've said, look, we want to be experts. We're going to start here. As individual projects have issues, bring them to us and we'll modify the legislation moving forward, right? It's that kind of responsiveness and that true engagement that becomes very interesting, because it's like there are certainly good things that came out of old securities regulations, right? Pump and dumps are always pump and dumps. The world does not change completely. Mm-hmm. But then there's a whole bunch of stuff that just is not relevant anymore because, things like, does your security exist? Well, you can go look on the blockchain and see that it does. right? So there's a whole host of differences that are relatively poor fits, and so having these regions that are willing to look at that and go, okay, we're going to bring the general investor protections, but then we're going to look at those and make sure they actually fit for what's going on.
And be small enough to be able to actually
light enough that a small team who's trying to raise a small amount of money can go do them.
5 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you for that heads up. So, okay, so I'm looking this up here that, we're looking it up here that Malta is in the central Mediterranean between Sicily and the North African coast. Do we know what the population is? I'm going to look.
It's pretty small. It's not, it's not dissimilar like a Cayman or various. It's also somewhat of a
with a population of under 500,000. Yeah. So they're really able to just pivot and,
Yep. But Euro banking, you've got access to the European banking system.
Yeah, that's also very cool.
That's right.
Yep. Because are they part of the EU?
They are.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, they're right there, just south of Sicily. That's so interesting. Less than 500,000 people in there. So where were the other kind of hubs? We had some in the Caribbean as well, right?
So actually on the crypto side, I'd say more like Switzerland. And Singapore have both been looking at this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of business in Hong Kong, whether that's, shall we say, well understood or not. That's a major hub. Both Japan and Korea have tremendous cryptocurrency markets as well. But for the more regulatory side of it, it's tended to be Switzerland, Singapore,
Cool.
Malta, as we said.
Cool. That's really important to know, is that like which places are able to lead.
Well, look, I laughingly, Switzerland's gotten expensive, and I also worry a little bit that like what we're trying to do is put banks out of business, and what Switzerland does is bank.
Yeah. Dang. So there was actually $6.8 billion in revenue generated by the affiliate industry in 2017.
That's right, and that's
huge.
just like U.S. and the U.K., right? So there's
there's
bigger
way
numbers
more.
out there,
Yeah, especially
right.
China and
yeah. And again, it's been difficult to manage these systems. So making the painful parts of those systems go away makes it a far less painful project to run.
Yeah, AE token is very exciting as well.
Yeah, cool. Anywhere where there's like a two-sided market and it's not 80-20, you've usually got these power laws going on in these businesses. When there's a broad open market, and this is where like the Uber model goes, right? You got a bunch of drivers, you got a bunch of riders, there's no kind of dominant entity. That happens in the middle market here in the token world, almost all the way to the tail. Yeah. Those are the kinds of economies where tokenization really makes some sense, and where you may not just want to use Bitcoin or Chia directly because you need some extra features that aren't ready yet or aren't there yet on some of the other chains.
Awesome. I think there's a couple things that I think we should talk about. Let's. I'll flip over this 15-minute timer. So that's at 35 now, right?
38.
38. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Eddie. So let's ask you a couple thoughts. I guess the first thought that I want to ask you is, this is kind of a funny thought, but who do you think Satoshi is?
So I'm pretty confident Hal Finney is part of Satoshi. Hal Finney.
Hal Finney.
Yeah, so Hal Finney is already well established as being the guy who Satoshi first started talking to.
Yeah.
And obviously Nick Szabo comes up as being part of it. It certainly wasn't just Hal, right? So I do think there was more than just Hal. But Hal and some other folks that are kind of old cypherpunks, this is their MO. In fact, just after Hal's death, Phil Zimmerman at PGP admitted that it was Hal who'd exported PGP and was supposedly would have been the target of the investigation, but Phil stepped in and took the public face of it intentionally. And so this is exactly Hal's MO. Plus, as Bram's been digging into the code, there are a lot of signatures of how Hal coded, and they are very much in the original release from Satoshi.
Interesting. I had also heard things like that a machine programmed.
Look, the whole AI comes back from the future is always interesting. But the funny thing about that is, excluding that it's all an AI. Stepping that aside. Yeah. At that moment in time, there were like 4 or 5 different researchers that had all the pieces. So the state of the art was there on the table, just nobody had pulled it together. And that's often one of the hardest problems, but it's partially why it doesn't feel like it was airdropped in by aliens, if you know what I'm trying to say. It was someone who, and, like Hal is often credited for being one of the predecessors with Hashcash, right? And it was taking that and some other things he was reading and pulling it together and really figuring out that like grinding was actually a security feature. I mean, these are weird thoughts, right? But like a lot of internet things, the hacked version is actually the best version.
This is kind of, we've talked about this before as being in a couple decades ago, the internet, all these new applications have been built on the internet. Now this is kind of this new blockchain infrastructure. All these new applications are being built on the blockchain infrastructure. We both know that a lot of them are going to die. And that
Cambrian explosion, then boom.
Cambrian explosion, yeah, exactly, and then boom. So what do you think are the main principles or characteristics that have to be at the core of these organizations in order for them to live?
So I think there's a couple things. I mean, I think you've got to be in these multi-sided markets, right? Because one of the things that, the real use of a blockchain is when there's not a lot of trust. It's a way to build trust in a trustless manner, right? So any place where there is those kinds of agency problems, somebody doesn't trust the other side, but you need to coordinate, very, very strong application. The more moving of money is core to what you're trying to do, and the fungibility of that and the ease of that, right? That's again where a blockchain or a side chain starts to really matter, right? I think there's a little stretch right now to try to build some applications directly against the blockchain. I actually think the applications are going to be more interesting up on like Lightning Network and these kind of next layer up technologies where, down below the Chia blockchain or the Bitcoin blockchain are hyper secure, a lot more conservative about changes. If you're buying a house, you're doing it on the blockchain. If you're buying coffee, you're doing it on Lightning. Right. And it's the way the world currently works. There's a reserve infrastructure, like remember the gold in 9/11 that they had to remove. I mean, that's the underlying banking infrastructure, right? In fact, like the French in the '60s, when the dollar was unpegged from gold, tried to grab their gold back by bringing a destroyer to New York Harbor. Like they wanted it loaded, right? We don't move the gold much, right? But layer up, you've got SWIFT, which is actually like a private internet. That's not actually what people kind of think it is, but SWIFT is the way the banks talk. And then you've got LIBOR, there's the bank window about how they loan each other, and you've got the Fed, and so you got all these things that then kind of bubble up to debit cards and ACH and then PayPal. Well, we're going to have to do the exact same sorts of layering. I think the layers are going to be a lot thinner. Maybe 3 layers. The thing you use to that your computer uses to talk to another computer and make sure that you're real, and you exchange 2 cents and you don't know about it in the background, and you keep your account loaded with $20, and when you look in it, there's $18 sometimes, and there's $21 other times, right?
So on Lightning, and just a quick question on here, how would we then ensure? Because with a card right now, I'm sure 100% of transactions are going through.
So Lightning uses both kind of time and the main blockchain. So the idea is that you'll build a channel. So you and I will connect, and I will put some money in, and I'll pay you $1. Well, that channel stays open. As you talk to other people, you now know how to reach me. And you can see that I've got more money, and so if I want to pay him, I can pass it through you. Now, if one of us cheats, we can kind of take it from a timestamp where that cheat happened, stop, and roll it all the way back. And that way, it's enforced by the security of the underlying blockchain.
And so it's constantly being analyzed to make sure that there's not a cheat, and if it is, then you go back to where it was.
Your iPhone or your Android is literally going to watch your channels to make sure all the transactions are legit.
Legit all the time, and it'll stop it if it's not being legit.
It'll roll it back, and all of a sudden the coins will go where they're supposed to go.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense for Lightning.
It's somewhat like, it's like checking, right? I mean, behind the scenes in the checking business, you can call your bank and they can go figure out what bank put it through, and you can unroll the transaction.
Which takes hours.
Not easy, but you can do it, right?
And to have it be automated is such a pleasure.
Well, one of the funny things about all of this is to get people to use e-commerce online, we all train them to use their credit cards, and so now they've got this assumption that every transaction they make can make a phone call and reverse it, right? It is a tremendous problem. Like the reason that Vendicia existed was because everybody had to move to subscription because of the underlying economics of the credit card infrastructure. It's not something the outside world kind of sees much, but chargebacks and all the fees that work underneath mean that you can't really sell something for 50 cents. I'm looking forward to, we've seen the kind of rise and maybe the peak of subscription. I'm looking forward to a world where Lightning and other things starts getting to you can give somebody 10 cents and it doesn't
Exactly.
It's only thought costs.
I'm so excited for that as well. There's this whole project that one of my friends, Jackson, was really working really closely on, and then I was definitely engaged with him on the idea a lot. And just this general notion of being paid per second of time. It's such an interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's always you got to think about it, right? And so you have to be careful about making sure things are priced in ways that humans don't, it's too expensive to even think. Right?
Yeah.
And
there's the whole transactional economy side of things. Like, I don't want you to have to come into the show and then for you to have to pay us per second or something stupid like that. But at the same time, it makes sense though for maybe the case of that you want to talk to somebody that's really prominent that can help your company out a lot, and you don't know them, you don't have a warm connection to them, and they can maybe open up a couple dollars per second line so that you can call them and talk to them in that sense, get feedback.
Well, and look, there's a kind of other hidden thing here, immutability. We had CryptoKitties, right? But there are other people looking at this and going, I'd love to have 100, 100 bill of cats in this world, right? And there will only ever be 100. Well, right now it's kind of hard to charge somebody $1 for that, right? But I can completely see a world where you charge $1 for that. That dollar price works economically, and the chain itself also enforces that only 100 of them will ever exist.
Yeah.
Right, and you can transfer them. Right.
Yeah.
There's a whole kind of all of the virtual economy things that Warcraft and other major games started to play with are now going to be not just virtual, but maybe far beyond the walls of gaming.
Yeah, that's so exciting as well. Okay, so a couple quick questions on the way out. One of them these are a couple that we ask on the show a lot. Gene, do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
I'm worried that the Occam's razor answer is that we are. Right. Now, the interesting question is, do Dyson spheres get created faster than the EM radiation moves out? Right. So that's one interesting way that the math doesn't work on, the conjecture, right? I certainly hope we're not. I'll say it that way. But, right now the evidence does not look pretty.
And do you think that we're in a simulation?
I don't think we're in a simulation. It's hard to explain why. I mean, you're down to philosophy, right? And it's actually, to me, one of the most interesting questions about AI and upload, right? I mean, is there something intrinsic to biology beyond simply chemistry and mathematics that we're not aware of, right? Yeah. I am not a very religious person, but the thing is, how you get that neural net started is an interesting question. It's one of the reasons why upload seems a little safer in the sense of, maybe that is how you take a running version, right, and keep it running. Yeah. But how do you start it from scratch? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, I really enjoy the mind is being molded in the womb, and the mind comes out and it starts perceiving an environment, it starts forming all the circuitry in the mind. Yeah, how can that all be how can that be both computationally mapped over time, but then also be potentially simulated in a sense. So.
Well, this is, I kind of agree with Kurzweil in the sense that, I think we're going to get to human digital interface depth faster, and then once you do that, you start, melding the best of both. Yeah. And then I think we might be able to answer that question. The first people who fully upload and fork are going to be very interesting, right?
Yeah. So you just said the word fork, and I do want to.
Sorry.
I want to see your perspective on this. It isn't something that we talk about on the show quite a bit. And then I got one last question for you, but just. The general Pinker argument about everybody slowly coming up over time is very true economically, but at the same time, we have never seen an exponential technology age like we do today.
That's right.
Do you suspect a forking in terms of just the sheer amount of genetic engineering and brain uploading and all this different stuff, cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, look, I think you're always going to have the first people who get adopted. Right. Right now in any technology, be it cryptocurrency, the early developers, are wealthy beyond most people's dreams, right? This always happens. Look, Tesla, a bunch of us own Model S's, and a whole bunch more people are going to own Model 3s finally. And that shifts down. Now, it's interesting with that exponentiation, that first uploader has a hell of an advantage. But at the same time, I think it's going to be like the computer revolution of the first upload's probably going to feel like a VIC-20, right? And that's not exactly the most fun thing out there. In fact, look, that's part of the problem with the current infrastructure of the blockchain world. I think we're in the TRS-80 era of blockchains.
You don't suspect. I agree with you, but you suspect that even though that the first initial adopters, that the bottom will still be coming up super quickly over time. That there won't be any sort of a speciation, like where we should be pretty good.
We're still an altruistic species, right? There's still that 72-member tribe, and so you at least want the 72-member tribe in, and each 72 wants their 72, right? I mean, I think that is where we go, and you start getting to the question of what's the core cost, and it's probably energy. And again, this is why I sit there going, let's make sure we're not wasting it on other things.
That zettabyte.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, Gene, last question. What do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
The most beautiful thing in the world. I don't know, it's probably a selfish answer, but being 50 or 60 miles offshore. I love when, experiencing how huge our actual world already is. People talk about all these things further. I think a lot of folks haven't ventured far enough from land or far enough from civilization in the desert to really get a sense of how big this world already is. I mean, it makes the thought of going to Mars, really exciting.
Yeah. Oh, I love the idea of exploring Earth, exploring other frontiers. That's a good one. So you love 50, 60 miles offshore.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then
it's like over the horizon, right?
Yeah.
It's like you now are truly responsible for everything of your own safety. If you go a little further, you're now out of helicopter range. It's a different world out there.
Yeah. And that's where death is so close to. Yeah, it's just.
Yeah, well, it's you are at Mother Nature's whim,
mercy, yeah.
and it's the ultimate test of your technology and your skill, right? Did you correctly make redundant tech? Is it well tested? Do you know what you're doing with it?
Do you know what you're doing with it? It's the same thing in the desert, like
exactly.
you're saying as well.
And I love those too.
Damn. Okay, awesome. This has been such a good episode. Thank you so much for coming on and teaching us. Yeah, better cryptocurrencies. It's been such a pleasure, Gene.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think there's so much that we can still learn. I think there's, thanks everybody for tuning in. Think about what we talked about. Better cryptocurrencies. How can we figure out these new sort of systems of proof of time, proof of space? Also, just what is the next advancements in blockchain technology, in cryptocurrency technology? How can we get more people involved in the conversations of starting them? Also, think about how all these applications work in our lives. And let's remember, don't just consume this content, go and create with it. Make blogs, make videos, make companies, go and start cool things with it. Subscribe, comment below with your thoughts. We'd love for you to join the community. Join us on Patreon, help us support this project, help us increase our impact. More people would greatly appreciate that. Thanks, Eddie. Thank you so much for producing and directing our show. Eddie.com, check him out as well. Much love, everyone. Thank you. Peace.
Okay, we are out.
Great.
Awesome.